Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be reviewing some of the recent tech advances that China has in its competition with the United States. And one of those, a major innovation that wasn't expected for another few years at the very least, was Huawei's 7nm chip. And so this article from the tomshardware.com website is called Huawei's new mystery 7nm chip from Chinese fab defies US sanctions. And so this makes the West super big mad. And the article starts off talking about Huawei's Kurin 9000S system on chip that powers Huawei's new Mate 60 Pro smartphone is rumored to be made by China-based SMIC using its second generation 7nm class fabrication process and stacking, according to Tech Insights, a significant semiconductor research firm, as per a report by the South China Morning Post. In addition, the SoC reportedly packs CPU and GPU featuring microarchitectures developed in-house. Okay, so we could skip some of this. Okay, so it looks to be quite complex. Good high-performance cores, 4 energy-efficient cores. Oh, okay. So Huawei's phone looks to take the Intel route when it comes to a CPU where it has some high performance cores and other energy efficient cores. That's interesting. So it's 8 core based on the company's Taon architecture. Let's see what else it says. Processing speed is only 750 megahertz. Not that good. I mean, it's probably good for a phone. I don't know. I'm comparing this to computer CPUs. Okay, so the low frequency, it says, can be explained by the fact that SMIC makes the new SoC on its unannounced second generation 7nm fabrication process, which is a breakthrough. So it'll get faster. This is just a new innovation, so that's why it's a low frequency. Okay. Although Tech Insights calls this fabrication technology SMIC's second generation production node, state-controlled Global Times claims that China's foundry champion uses its 5nm class manufacturing technology to make the SoC, but these two names seem to describe the same thing, which was once known as SMIC's N+2. Okay, so, all right, let's see. At the time, it looked an evolutionary step of its N+1, which was once called a low-cost alternative. All right, so we can skip some of this. SMIC has never confirmed that it produces chips on 7 and 5nm class nodes, yet there are independent proofs. Okay, so we have the 7nm, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so here, meanwhile, SMIC deep DUV lithography scanners can make chips on 7nm and 5nm technologies, so that the company may have developed a 5nm class fabrication process. That's excellent. So they're getting closer and closer. People were shocked about the 7nm, and I should mention, for people who don't know, but you want smaller and smaller chips. So it used to be the case that China had like 24nm chips, and then it got down to 7 now. It was at 14 for a little bit as well. And then it says here that they might also be possible. It might also be possible for production level quantity of 5nm chips. And then after that, you have things like 2nm chips, and then lower than 2nm as well. But that it's really cutting edge to get down to 5nm chips already. Okay. So really, it's about the cost of producing the chips and how many chips can't be produced. And right now, the 5nm is not particularly economically efficient, they're saying here. Okay. Okay, so Huawei lost access to American technologies in 2020. HiSilicon is a chip designer and could no longer work with the world's largest contract maker of chips, and is believed that the parent company helped SMIC to advance its fabrication processes. If this is the case, then the Kurin 9000S is the first fruit of this collaboration. Okay, interesting. Huawei has not commented on the matter, and even state-ran Global Times does not explicitly say the HiSilicon Kurin 9000S uses SMIC's 5nm class process technology, but prefers to call the information a rumor. All right, so that's interesting. We have another article here, and this is an opinion piece talking about the chip war that is occurring in China and why they think this is a patriotic war for China. So this is from the South China Morning Post, and this is an opinion piece. Chip war is now a patriotic war for China. So we've talked a lot on this channel about the recent science and tech innovations in China, and this article hopefully will tell us, why does China fight so hard in order to get these most recent technologies? I mentioned, and I don't know if the Chinese government ever heard my articles, the writing I did a decade ago on this, but I did mention the importance of semiconductor chips and having a domestic supply of this back when I was about 20 years old. So that was, how many years ago was that? This is, we're in 2023. So that was 13-ish years ago that I talked about this. And so you're seeing China is very strongly supporting their semiconductor industry now, which is what I said to do 13 years ago. So you can call me Joe Stradamus. I'm a prophet. Thank you very much. Anyways, let's look at this article. A leading Chinese telecoms company released a new smartphone, and no less than the White House Secretary Advisor Jake Sullivan was asked at the press conference to comment on it. Okay. Sullivan said the U.S. needed to analyze Huawei's technology's new phone chip in precise technical details. So they're not sure how Huawei did this. So they're shocked that Huawei was able to get a 7-nanometer chip so quickly. So they're withholding comment. Okay. So what it tells us, regardless, is that the United States should continue on its course of a small yard, high fence set of technology restrictions, focus narrowly on national security concerns, not on the broader question of commercial decoupling. So this is a ridiculous statement. You have to understand semiconductors to understand why this is ridiculous. One is they were trying to sanction everything before and they just failed at it. And so now they're trying to sanction just the most important things. That's why they're calling it a small yard, high fence. And so they're trying to really restrict the most advanced processes because they realize they've lost in every other regard. And so now they're trying in terms of semiconductors to make sure that China doesn't get access to things like 2-nanometer semiconductor chips. But that's a fallback strategy. They changed the goalpost because they failed initially. But two, the later part of this sentence does not make sense. So it says, restrictions focus narrowly on national security concerns, not on the broader question of commercial decoupling. Well, here's the thing. When it comes to semiconductor chips, you really only need the most cutting edge for things like computer technology, which is mostly commercial use, things like people's personal computers. When it comes to military equipment, they don't really use the most cutting edge, smaller 2-nanometer chips. They use the more like 24 nanometer, 28 nanometer, or whatever it is chips. So talking about decoupling on national security concerns, but not commercial decoupling, they're really doing the opposite right now. And they're trying to restrict commercial decoupling because that's the most cutting edge. And they're not able to do that. And so they're just lying to you. And they're lying in a way that if you don't understand semiconductors, you won't understand that they're doing the exact opposite of what they're saying here. So anyways, let's move on. So this talks about the character and composition, national security concerns. In the Cold War days, that kind of response would have been if the Soviets had just tested a new type of nuclear bomb. So now we're talking about semiconductor chips instead of nuclear bombs. As many commentators have observed, it was no accident that Huawei released its latest phone during the U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo's high-profile mission to China. That's actually like pretty funny. I don't think it was an accident either. It could have been. I mean, China's just creating so many innovations that like maybe it is just a coincidence, but I don't think it is. And it is funny because it shows that United States sanctions are just not working whatsoever. And they also understand that diplomacy with the United States just doesn't work at all because they say one thing and do another thing. And so even while they're feigning diplomacy with the United States, who just is liars and you should just never believe them, they're still styling on them when it comes to creating smaller and smaller semiconductor chips. Okay, let's see what else it has to say here. So the new phone is selling like hotcakes. It has generated patriotic fervor and enthusiasm across the country, not because consumers can't buy comparable 5G phones, but because it's made by Huawei. People thought Huawei was going to die completely when the United States just sanctioned it completely. But just like with Russia being sanctioned completely by the United States, it rose like a phoenix and took on this new form, this more patriotic, more sovereign form. And so the United States sanctions just don't hit like they used to. Okay, so shares of Huawei's component suppliers have shot up with an index that specializes in tracking China's top chip makers, outstripping the broader equities by almost 10%. It's exactly what Chinese leaders love the most in life, a commercial high-tech success that inspires nationalism while boosting the stock market and sticking it to the Americans. It's also indicative of where the chip war is going. Okay, so we see here, skipping that. In this metaphorical tech war between the US and China, China is bound to win. There is a simple reason for that. The Chinese can't afford to lose, but the Americans can. I don't know about that. So I think the American people think they can afford to lose this tech war, but I think the American elites recognize that they can't actually lose a tech war because the United States would face a civil war if things continue to collapse for America. Like, the thing is, the American way of doing things cannot accept being second best because they need to be able to dictate terms to the rest of the world so they can exploit the populace and extract their resources. And so for them, there is no coming in second here. They recognize that their life expectancy is dependent on, the elites recognize their life expectancy is dependent on being number one and not having anything that resembles a near peer competitor, especially not a peer competitor either. And so, yeah, this is an existential crisis for the American oligarchs. And I think they're going to take it to the extreme because for them, it's either win or die. Okay, so moving on with the article, this means China has an unbounded will to fight and achieve technical independence. Quite simply, everything else, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 6G+, telecommunications, all depend on this single technology. Yeah, the semiconductors. And I said this 13 years ago, China really needs to have sovereignty over semiconductor chips. Don't depend on Taiwan because the United States is going to restrict it. On it rests China's hope to achieve high-tech preeminence as a nation for the rest of this century. The chip war is a bit like the last space tech competition. Despite Vladimir Putin's frequent belligerent statements and actions against the West well before his invasion and annexation of Crimea in 2014, the US was happy to cooperate with Russia over space projects, including joint projects on board the International Space Station even today, yet it refused cooperation from China's space agencies and banned Chinese astronauts from ever visiting the ISS. So, yeah, China recognizes that they're essentially at war with the United States. It just hasn't become a direct bloodbath yet. So what did the Chinese do? They had built their own space station, are planning manned missions to the moon, perhaps even to Mars. The chip war really is about China's national security, if not survival. For the US, though, it really is about neither. I would disagree with this article here, especially for the oligarchs. However much its leaders want to claim otherwise. I mean, for them, it is. I think this person is decoupling what is an existential crisis for America, the majority of the populace of America, and an existential crisis for the elite of America, because they are two completely separate things. This is not an existential crisis for the majority of people, but it is an existential crisis for the leadership of America, the oligarchs. Washington may pretend denying the most advanced chips of China has all to do with U.S. national security. It rolls out National Security Advisor, pontificates, blah, blah, blah. No one would be convinced, of course, except the most foolish and gullible. U.S. alarmism only holds by the broadest definition of security the kind of typically exaggerated security claims, according to which any advance made by an unfriendly state amounts to a threat to the U.S. national security, national interest, or security. Okay, so let's see, skip a little bit. Patriotic fervor inspired by Huawei's new phone shows precisely that. Many Chinese people think they have a high stake in countering America's chip aggression against their country, but it gets better. They're not being drafted into fighting war. Okay, that's an interesting take on it. So they're having a tech war instead of like a hot war, an actual fight. And so they like it, so they can be patriotic without being drafted. Younger Chinese always love buying the latest tech gadgets. I personally, right now I have a Samsung phone, but I would absolutely, for my next phone, buy a Huawei phone. At this point, the technology is there. I trust them more to not have backdoors for Western intelligence agencies. And so, yeah, this is an endorsement from an American citizen living in the Philippines, but I would absolutely buy a Huawei phone. And I encourage everyone else to also buy Huawei. I believe I encourage my wife to buy Huawei too. I think she has a Huawei phone. But yes, the phones are great. Definitely buy Huawei if you can. Buy Chinese made whenever possible. Okay. So Chinese are buying Huawei phones for patriotic reasons. Ever since America first imposed a chip ban on Huawei in 2019 and sought to arrest its number 2 on dubious charges, Washington has wanted to kill it off to deny China's 5G network access to the rest of the world. That is turning out to be a pipe dream for the opposite reason. Whatever preeminence Huawei may have already played in China's high-tech ecosystem, the Chinese state must make sure it survives and prospers as a matter of national prestige. Yeah, you can't, I mean, even if you think there are other companies that could do the same thing that Huawei does, you can't allow another nation to bully one of your own country's major industries, major organizations within industry like this. And so for them, it is a matter of national security that they don't allow Huawei to collapse if Huawei is actually doing a good job, which it seems like they are. Okay, so the article ends with, to rephrase JFK's famous saying, for patriotic Chinese consumers today, ask not what Huawei can sell to you, but what you can buy from Huawei. I guess that's a nice way of putting it. So this is an interesting article by South China Morning Post called The Chip War is Now a Patriotic War for China. So anyways, if you found these two articles that we reviewed to be helpful, to be informative, to be interesting, about the latest science and technology advances in China and how that affects the global world, the trade war with the United States, the advances of civilization and culture and science and technology, obviously, please leave us a thumbs up. It helps us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble for more content. And please leave us a comment in the comment box below, questions, concerns, critiques you might have. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.